Cherry Mackerel hated blind dates. Hate was too soft a word. She loathed them, detested them with the full force of her high-class, meticulously curated life. As an architect, she appreciated precision, vision, and beauty, and yet every man her friend Camille tried to set her up with seemed to lack all three. Tonight, she sat at a rooftop lounge in Tennessee, glass of champagne in hand, pretending to be amused by the twinkling city lights while dreading the arrival of David, her blind date. She had only seen his photo once, and from the start, something in her gut screamed that he was insufferable. When he finally arrived, her instincts had been terrifyingly accurate. David swaggered toward her table with the air of a man who believed the world owed him attention. The expensive suit he wore couldn't disguise the smug expression on his face, nor could it mask the way he scanned the room for prettier women before even acknowledging her presence. "Cherry, right?" he said, offering a hand she barely shook. "I hope you're ready for a fun evening with me." She smiled politely, hiding her immediate urge to roll her eyes. "Oh, I'm thrilled," she said, voice calm but laced with ice. From the first words he spoke, Cherry's patience evaporated. He bragged incessantly about his job, his money, his travels, and most infuriatingly he never stopped scanning the room, checking out other women as if she were invisible. Every sentence was a showcase of his ego, every gesture a reminder of why she had sworn off dating. Cherry's eyes drifted over the lounge, almost hoping for a distraction. And then she saw him. He wasn't part of the event, wasn't on her radar. He stood across the room, reviewing documents in a perfectly tailored navy suit, radiating calm authority. There was something magnetic about him, something that drew attention without effort, without arrogance. He was different. Something bold, impulsive, and intoxicating stirred in Cherry. She wanted to escape the disaster sitting across from her, and in a reckless moment she decided to make her own fun. Without hesitation, she rose from her seat, ignoring David's baffled gaze. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she strode across the lounge, and before anyone could react, she pressed her lips to the stranger's in a fierce, audacious kiss. The world narrowed to that instant, the heat, the boldness, the thrill of doing something unapologetically her own. She tilted her head, pressing just enough pressure to make her statement. She was in control, she was alive, and she would not be bored tonight. Then just as suddenly as it began, Cherry pulled back. She gathered her purse and coat, gave a fleeting, mischievous smile and walked out. No goodbyes. No explanations. David sat frozen, speechless, and humiliated. The stranger Dong-Hun Han stood still for a moment, processing, intrigued, and more than a little shaken. Cherry Mackerel had no idea that the man she kissed was a billionaire CEO, engaged and on a business trip in Tennessee. And Dong-Hun Han had no idea that this impulsive, fearless woman had just planted a spark that would ignite chaos in his carefully controlled world. One kiss. One exit. And neither of them would ever be the same. Dong-Hun Han stood frozen in the lounge, the faint scent of Cherry's perfume still lingering in the air. He was a man accustomed to control boardrooms, multimillion-dollar deals, contracts, schedules, but nothing had ever thrown him off balance like that kiss. One fierce, impulsive act had ignited a storm in his chest that he could neither predict nor suppress. His fiancée's name hovered in his mind, a reminder of duty and expectation, yet now it felt strangely distant. This woman, Cherry Mackerel, was reckless, fearless, unapologetically alive. And somehow she had just claimed a piece of his attention in a way no one else ever had. For a moment, he considered chasing after her, demanding answers, or even introducing himself. But then he caught the faint glimmer of mischief in her eyes, the audacious spark of independence that refused to be tamed, and he stopped. She had left on her own terms, and that defiance made her even more intriguing. He returned to his papers with a mechanical focus, but his thoughts kept drifting back to her, the way she had moved, the boldness of her kiss, the subtle curve of her smile. Even the way she had exited without a word had left a mark on him, a pull he didn't recognize at first but couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, Cherry walked briskly through the night air, adrenaline still thrumming through her veins. She had no intention of lingering in anyone's world tonight, especially not David's, who had been a tedious disaster from the moment he arrived. But the kiss, it was different. Thrilling. Dangerous. And undeniably memorable. By the time she reached her car, she told herself firmly, it was just one kiss. A reckless moment of fun. Nothing more. She would not think about it again. Yet, somewhere in the quiet streets of Tennessee, Dong-Hun Han was thinking about her. Every strategic plan, every meeting, every obligation suddenly felt incomplete. That kiss had cracked the walls he had built around himself, revealing a part of him that wanted chaos, freedom, and something or someone he didn't yet understand. The next morning, Cherry Mackerel woke to the soft light spilling across her sleek apartment in Nashville. The city below buzzed with life, but she moved through her morning routine with the quiet confidence of someone who owned her world. She dressed in a tailored blazer and pencil skirt, her hair perfectly straightened, a cup of coffee in one hand and her tablet in the other. Today was all about work. Meetings with clients, design plans for a new modernist building, and presentations that would showcase her vision and creativity. Love, drama, and blind dates were, officially, things of the past. Yet, she couldn't shake the memory of the previous night. The kiss had been bold, dangerous, and thrilling, but she refused to dwell on it. It was impulsive. Fun. A story she would laugh about later if she ever dared tell anyone. Meanwhile, across the state, Dong-Hun Han sat in his luxury hotel suite overlooking the city. Tennessee wasn't home, but it was business territory, an important investment he needed to oversee. His mind should have been on spreadsheets, profit margins, and team reports. Yet, one thought dominated every corner of his brain: Cherry Mackerel. He couldn't stop thinking about her, the fierce way she had claimed the moment, the boldness in her eyes, the way she had walked away like she owned the night. She was reckless, untamed, and utterly intoxicating. And the fact that he didn't even know her name made it worse. Dong-Hun's assistant entered, breaking his reverie with a gentle knock. "Sir, the board meeting is ready. You'll need to review the contracts before the investors arrive." He nodded absently, but his mind drifted back to her. He had a fiancée, a woman he respected, and yet the thought of Cherry's bold kiss made his chest tighten in a way he couldn't ignore. He pushed the feeling aside, a man of discipline, but deep down he knew one thing: he wanted to see her again. Cherry, unaware of the man's identity or the chaos she had stirred, dove into her work. She reviewed blueprints, consulted with her team, and even visited one of her construction sites. Her life was organized, planned, and independent. Romance had always been a complication she didn't need. But the universe, as it often does, had other plans. A client meeting took her to a high-end business district, the very area where Dong-Hun had offices for one of his investments. Cherry entered the building, focused on her presentation, oblivious to the man in the corner conference room watching security footage. Dong-Hun had already heard of her well, not by name but by presence. The kiss had left an impression too potent to ignore. And soon the paths of Cherry Mackerel and Dong-Hun Han would cross again, not by chance, but by design. One kiss had set everything in motion, and neither of them had the faintest idea how complicated, thrilling, and chaotic their lives were about to become. Cherry Mackerel stepped into the gleaming lobby of Han Global Enterprises' local office, completely unaware of the storm she was about to walk into. She was here for a meeting with a client, a high-profile real estate project that could change her firm's trajectory. Confident, poised, and impeccably stylish, she moved with the ease of someone who owned her life. What she did not expect was the man waiting for her in the conference room: Dong-Hun Han. He looked every bit the part of the billionaire CEO, sharp suit, commanding presence, eyes that seemed to see straight through her. He hadn't expected to see her here either, and the moment their eyes met, the world seemed to shrink around them. For Cherry, the recognition was immediate. Her stomach fluttered not with fear, but with a wild, unpredictable thrill. The man she had kissed in the lounge weeks ago, the stranger who had burned his memory into her mind, was now sitting across from her, impeccably composed, but undeniably aware of her. "Ms. Mackerel," Dong-Hun said smoothly, his voice calm yet carrying the weight of authority. "I didn't expect to see you here." Cherry's lips curved into a subtle, teasing smile. "Mister?" she asked, letting the mystery hang. She enjoyed keeping him guessing, just as he had captivated her with his quiet power. "Han." "Dong-Hun Han," he replied, deliberately giving her only what she needed to know. "And you? It's interesting that we meet again under these circumstances." Cherry laughed lightly, masking the surge of adrenaline running through her. "Interesting indeed," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Although I must admit, I didn't expect to be sharing a conference table with someone I met rather unexpectedly." Dong-Hun's eyes narrowed slightly, just enough to reveal intrigue beneath his controlled exterior. "I seem to remember a kiss," he said, carefully neutral, though there was heat in his gaze that betrayed him. Cherry's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned back, letting the tension linger. Let's just say it was a moment of spontaneity. For the next hour, they discussed the project with Cherry's client, professional and precise, but every glance, every subtle gesture carried unspoken electricity. Dong-Hun observed her brilliance, her confidence, her meticulous attention to detail. He admired her independence even as he fought against the growing desire she stirred in him. Cherry meanwhile noticed the calm authority he wielded, the magnetic presence that commanded respect without arrogance. She recognized the danger in him, the power, the influence, the life she didn't belong to, but something in her rebel spirit relished the challenge. When the meeting concluded, Cherry gathered her materials, stood and prepared to leave. For a moment she considered staying, leaning into the tension, teasing him further. But she wasn't the kind of woman who lingered for anyone, not even a billionaire CEO. As she walked toward the door, Dong-Hun's voice stopped her. "Ms. Mackerel," he said quietly, just enough for her to hear, "I hope this isn't the last time we meet." She paused, smiled over her shoulder, and let the words hang in the air. "Who knows, Mr. Han?" she replied, and then she was gone. Outside, Cherry exhaled slowly, adrenaline and thrill mingling in her chest. She had survived an encounter with a man who was far more dangerous than any of her previous dates. And for some reason she wanted to see him again. Inside the office, Dong-Hun watched the door swing closed, a rare flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. That kiss in the lounge, brief as it was, had ignited something he couldn't ignore. And now, face to face with her brilliance, charm and defiance, he realized one thing with terrifying clarity. Cherry Mackerel wasn't just a distraction. She might be a complication he could not and would not resist. Cherry Mackerel returned to her apartment that evening, the memory of her kiss with Dong-Hun Han still sparking in her mind. She told herself it was nothing, just a brief, reckless thrill, a spontaneous act of fun. Her life was full: work, friends and a freedom she guarded fiercely. Romance had never been kind to her, and she wasn't about to make it complicated. Yet even as she scrolled through her emails and reviewed architectural plans, she couldn't shake the image of him. The stranger in the lounge, so calm, so composed, yet somehow entirely alive with the quiet intensity that had unsettled her in the best possible way. Across the city, Dong-Hun Han stared out of the window of his luxury hotel suite, the skyline of Tennessee stretching before him. He had come on this business trip to oversee a major investment, a project critical to his empire, and everything had been meticulously planned until Cherry had appeared. That one kiss had left him distracted, unsettled, and surprisingly eager to see her again. His thoughts, however, were not his own to control. His fiancée, Seoyeon, had flown in from Seoul to oversee his Tennessee commitments and maintain the appearance of perfect alignment between their worlds. Elegant, poised, and flawlessly composed, she was the woman who had been chosen to stand beside him in every boardroom and social engagement. She was everything Cherry was not: careful, calculated, and controlled. "Dong-Hun," Seoyeon said softly that evening, her eyes sharp and measuring as she approached him at a formal dinner for the investment project. "You seem distracted. Is everything okay with the meeting?" He nodded, masking the tumult of his thoughts with calm precision. "Yes, everything went smoothly," he said, though a part of him longed to tell her the truth, that the woman he couldn't stop thinking about had changed the rules of his carefully ordered life in one impulsive act. Meanwhile, Cherry's phone buzzed with a reminder for a professional networking event that evening. The venue was in the same district as Dong-Hun's offices, a coincidence that she didn't yet recognize as fate. With a shrug, she decided to attend. She needed to meet potential clients, expand her professional circle, and enjoy a night out, nothing more. When she arrived, the upscale space was bustling with professionals and socialites. Cherry moved confidently through the crowd, her every gesture radiating the poise and assurance of someone who knew exactly who she was. And then she saw him. Dong-Hun Han, standing near the bar, impeccably dressed, commanding attention even without trying. The memory of his lips, his calm authority, the heat in his gaze, everything about him had remained vivid in her mind since their first encounter. Their eyes met, and for a moment the noise of the event faded, replaced by the silent electricity that had always sparked between them. Seoyeon, standing nearby, noticed the recognition in Dong-Hun's eyes and the slight shift in his posture. Though she didn't yet know Cherry's identity, she sensed the threat that lingered like a shadow in the room. Dong-Hun's thoughts, once entirely under control, now teetered on the edge of distraction, fascination, and desire. Cherry felt it too, the thrill of danger, the intoxicating pull of a man who was untouchable by circumstance, yet somehow undeniably drawn to her. And in that moment she knew their story was only beginning. One kiss, one audacious exit, and now the stage was set for a collision of worlds: bold independence against calculated power, desire against duty, and two lives that neither of them could ignore. Cherry Mackerel moved gracefully through the upscale networking event, exchanging polite greetings and business cards with potential clients. She was all elegance and professionalism, her laughter light, her charm effortless. Yet, amid the crowd, her gaze kept returning to one man, Dong-Hun Han. He hadn't approached her yet, but his presence was undeniable. Across the room, he observed her every move, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. She was bold, clever, and mesmerizing, not the type of woman he could ignore. And though he reminded himself of his fiancée, Seoyeon, sitting nearby and impeccably composed, a part of him longed to close the distance between them. Cherry finally found herself near the bar, pretending to check her phone while her eyes subtly searched for him. And then, as if drawn by gravity, their gazes locked. "Fancy meeting you here again," Dong-Hun said, appearing beside her with that calm, commanding presence that made the room shrink around them. Cherry looked up, startled for only a moment, before her trademark mischievous smile returned. "I could say the same to you," she replied, her tone teasing yet confident. "But I suppose the world is smaller than I thought." Dong-Hun's eyes flicked briefly toward Seoyeon, who was engaged in conversation across the room, perfectly composed yet ever watchful. He returned his attention to Cherry, the pull between them undeniable. "It seems fate or perhaps poor planning has brought us together," he said, his voice low, smooth and dangerous. Cherry chuckled softly, leaning slightly closer to him, enjoying the tension. "Or maybe it's just luck," she said. "Although, I must admit, I prefer to make my own luck." The heat in his gaze intensified, subtle but impossible to ignore. "You're reckless," he said, almost a statement, almost a question. "And you're far too intrigued to walk away," she countered, letting the words hang like a challenge. Dong-Hun smiled faintly, acknowledging the truth in her statement. Every instinct told him to resist his fiancée, his obligations, his carefully constructed life, but the spark she ignited refused to be contained. As the crowd shifted around them, Cherry offered a subtle, daring grin. "Shall we see who can resist the other longer?" she whispered, not waiting for an answer. With that, she moved away, weaving through the crowd with effortless poise, leaving him standing by the bar, captivated and unsettled in equal measure. Seoyeon across the room noticed the brief interaction. Her eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of calculation crossing her perfect composure. She didn't know this woman yet, but she could sense the danger she represented, an unpredictable variable in Dong-Hun's controlled life. Dong-Hun's thoughts, usually disciplined and methodical, were anything but orderly. Cherry had been reckless once, bold and fearless. And now, after seeing her again, he realized just how dangerously alive she made him feel. "And Cherry?" She moved through the crowd with a thrill in her chest, knowing she had captured his attention once again. The game was on, and neither of them wanted to back down. Cherry Mackerel returned to her apartment that evening, sliding the door closed behind her. The city lights of Nashville spilled across her sleek, modern furniture, but she barely noticed them. Her mind was elsewhere, on the man she had kissed in the lounge, whose magnetic presence still lingered in her thoughts like a spark she couldn't quite extinguish. She tried to shake it off. A reckless, bold, and fleeting kiss shouldn't have mattered. She had given herself permission to take a break from love, to indulge only in her independence and her work. Romance had always ended in frustration, heartbreak, or both. But Cherry could not deny that something about Dong-Hun Han had unsettled her. Not in a scary way. Not in a controlling way. In a thrilling way she hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, Dong-Hun sat in his hotel suite, overlooking the skyline of Tennessee. He had arrived for a high-stakes business investment, a project that demanded precision, control, and absolute focus. Yet every plan he tried to make, every spreadsheet he opened, every meeting he scheduled, faltered under the weight of one thought: Cherry Mackerel. He had a fiancée, Seoyeon, who had flown in from Seoul to oversee his trip and ensure everything stayed on schedule. She was elegant, poised, perfect, and observant, the ideal partner in the world of high finance and influence. And yet, after a single impulsive kiss, he found her expectations suffocating and his control slipping. The next morning, Cherry returned to her firm, diving into her work. Meetings, design plans, and client calls filled her day, but her mind wandered despite her best efforts. She found herself thinking about his calm authority, the subtle intensity of his gaze, the thrill of knowing he noticed her. Something about him suggested a life far bigger than her own, and her curiosity burned. Later that evening, Cherry received an invite for a professional networking event downtown. She almost declined, but the idea of expanding her contacts and perhaps enjoying a night of distraction proved too tempting. Unbeknownst to her, fate had already positioned him there. Dong-Hun, aware of the event, had arranged to attend under the guise of business. He would remain discreet. Seoyun's presence nearby made any open acknowledgement impossible, but he wanted to see her again. One encounter had already cracked the walls of his controlled life, and he wasn't ready to close them. As Cherry entered the venue, her confidence radiated through the crowd. And then she saw him, Dong-Hun Han, tall, impeccably dressed and impossibly magnetic, his eyes immediately finding hers. For a fleeting moment, everything else in the room disappeared. Seoyun, sitting nearby, noticed the subtle pull in his gaze. Though she didn't yet know Cherry's identity, her intuition sensed a threat, an unpredictable, dangerous variable in her carefully controlled world. Cherry moved through the crowd with her usual poise, aware of the subtle tension between them and excited by it. The spark had been struck. And neither of them would ignore it again. Cherry Mackerel stepped into the buzzing lobby of the upscale networking event, the subtle hum of conversations and clinking glasses surrounding her. She had expected professional evening meetings, introductions, potential clients, but she didn't expect to feel a thrill the moment she walked through the door. And then she saw him. Dong-Hun Han stood near the bar, effortlessly commanding attention without seeming to try. His tailored navy suit fit like a second skin, his posture precise, his gaze sharp yet calm. Their eyes met, and Cherry felt a spark ignite somewhere deep in her chest. It was magnetic, dangerous, impossible to ignore. She approached the bar with measured confidence, hoping she wasn't imagining the heat in his stare. He didn't move, didn't speak at first. He simply watched her, like a predator assessing prey, though there was no malice, only fascination. "Fancy seeing you here," Dong-Hun said smoothly, sliding onto the seat beside her, his voice low and controlled. Cherry arched an eyebrow, her lips curling into a teasing smile. "I could say the same," she replied, letting the words hang in the air like a challenge. "Though I suppose the world is smaller than I thought." His eyes flicked briefly toward Seoyun, standing elegantly across the room, yet his attention returned instantly to Cherry. "It seems fate or poor planning has brought us together," he said. "Or perhaps it's neither, and we simply find ourselves in the same orbit." Cherry smirked, leaning slightly closer, her voice a quiet dare. "Or maybe it's just luck. Although I prefer to make my own." Dong-Hun's subtle smile deepened. "Reckless," he murmured, almost to himself, almost as a question. Cherry's chest fluttered slightly, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned back, enjoying the silent tension crackling between them. "And you," she said slowly, letting the weight of her gaze meet his, seemed far too intrigued to walk away. Their conversation danced around professional topics at first, a thin veil over the more personal chemistry that neither could fully ignore. Every glance, every subtle gesture carried an unspoken electricity, a pull neither of them wanted to resist. Seoyun across the room noticed the intensity. She didn't yet know Cherry, but her sharp intuition sensed a disruption, a threat she couldn't yet define. Her eyes flicked toward Dong-Hun, and she noted the subtle shift in his focus, one she didn't like. As the crowd moved, Cherry gave a faint, daring smile and excused herself. "It seems I should continue circulating," she said. Dong-Hun's voice followed her, low, deliberate, and dangerous. "I hope this isn't the last time we meet." Cherry paused, casting a final glance over her shoulder. "Who knows, Mr. Han?" she replied, letting the uncertainty hang in the air. Then she disappeared into the crowd, leaving him watching, captivated and unsettled. For the first time in years, Dong-Hun Han felt completely off balance, and he liked it. Cherry Mackerel returned to her apartment that evening, the echo of Dong-Hun's calm, confident voice lingering in her mind. She told herself she had handled it perfectly. She had maintained poise, independence, and control. She hadn't lingered, hadn't given in to temptation. She was Cherry Mackerel, a woman who didn't rely on anyone for excitement or validation. And yet, she couldn't shake the memory of his gaze, the subtle heat, the almost imperceptible smirk, the way he had made her pulse quicken without even touching her. Dong-Hun Han, meanwhile, sat in his hotel suite overlooking the city. Seoyun, his fiancée, had flown in from Seoul to oversee his Tennessee obligations, a constant reminder of duty and expectations. Yet he couldn't stop thinking about Cherry, the woman who had kissed him without warning, who had reappeared with effortless poise at the networking event, and who now refused to leave his thoughts. He had to see her again. Not through coincidence, not at random, but intentionally. And he knew he needed subtlety. Seoyun's watchful eyes and his own obligations demanded discretion. The next morning, he arranged a meeting under professional pretenses, an investor consultation that conveniently required Cherry's expertise and presence. Timing was everything. When Cherry arrived, she sensed immediately that the encounter wasn't entirely by chance. Dong-Hun stood near the entrance, impeccably dressed, eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. "You seem to have a knack for showing up where I least expect it," she said, crossing her arms with a teasing edge. "Or perhaps," he replied, stepping closer with measured confidence, "I know exactly where to find trouble." Cherry's lips quirked, caught off guard by his calm audacity. There was something thrilling about the way he spoke, authoritative yet playful, magnetic yet controlled. As the meeting commenced, professional conversation quickly gave way to a more personal, charged dialogue. Every glance, every subtle smile, every shared joke became an unspoken contest, a battle of wit, charm, and attraction. Cherry found herself laughing more freely than she had in months, and for the first time she felt truly seen by someone outside her professional sphere. Yet even as the tension between them grew, Seoyin remained a looming presence in Dong-Hun's life. A message from her appeared on his phone, a reminder of obligations, schedules, and appearances. He ignored it just for a moment, savoring the rare thrill Cherry elicited. By the end of the day, Cherry rose to leave, her pulse quickened, her mind buzzing with exhilaration and danger. "I suppose this conversation isn't over," she said, her voice carrying a subtle challenge. Dong-Hun's gaze held hers, intense and deliberate. "No," he said, "it's far from over." And as Cherry walked away, she felt a shiver of anticipation. Something unspoken had passed between them, a promise of chaos, desire, and intrigue that neither could resist. For Dong-Hun the pull was undeniable. For Cherry the thrill was intoxicating. And for Seoyin, though she did not yet know it, the first ripple of a storm had begun. Cherry Mackerel arrived at her firm that morning with a sense of purpose. Her work demanded precision, creativity, and attention to detail, and today she needed all of it. She had little time for distractions, yet a faint thrill lingered under her professionalism. A subtle awareness that something unpredictable had entered her life. Dong-Hun Han, meanwhile, was already several blocks away at a high-end property showcase, conducting meetings with investors. His mind, however, was not on contracts or projections. It was on Cherry, the woman who had kissed him boldly in a lounge, who had walked into his professional orbit again, and who had, quite literally, invaded his thoughts. This time he decided on a more deliberate approach. He reached out to one of Cherry's associates under the guise of discussing a partnership. The goal was simple: to engineer a situation where he could spend private, focused time with her, away from the public gaze but still under professional pretenses. Cherry arrived at the arranged location, a chic showroom filled with architectural models and modern designs. She recognized the subtle tension in the air the instant she stepped inside. And then she saw him, Dong-Hun Han, impeccably tailored suit, eyes locking onto hers with that quiet authority that never failed to unsettle her. "Ms. Mackerel," he greeted, his tone smooth, confident, yet carrying an edge that hinted at private amusement. "I hope you don't mind me inviting you here like this. Strictly professional, of course." Cherry raised an eyebrow, folding her arms with playful defiance. "Strictly professional, you say?" she asked, her voice teasing. "I'm not so sure I trust that." He leaned closer, subtly, careful not to break boundaries but deliberately testing them. "I assure you," he said, voice low, "the only thing I'm interested in testing is how far you can surprise me." The words sent a shiver of anticipation down her spine. Cherry realized he wasn't flirting openly, but the tension in his gaze, the quiet challenge in his tone, was more dangerous than any overt advance. She matched him, leaning back, letting the unspoken battle unfold. Their discussion moved seamlessly between the professional and the personal. They debated design choices, laughed at small incongruities in the presentation, and yet every gesture, every glance carried a subtle magnetism. Cherry noticed the precision in his movements, the control in his demeanor, and the faint smile that suggested he was thoroughly enjoying the exchange. And yet the stakes were higher than ever. By the end of their meeting, the air between them was thick with possibility. Cherry gathered her things, stepping back to leave, her heartbeat quickened, the thrill of the encounter lingering. Dong-Hun's voice followed her, quiet but deliberate. "I hope this isn't the last time we see each other like this." Cherry paused, meeting his gaze, letting the unspoken acknowledgement of tension and intrigue hang between them. "Perhaps not," she said, a hint of a challenge in her voice before walking away. And as the door closed behind her, the air remained charged with a dangerous pull neither of them could deny. The following evening, Cherry Mackerel found herself walking through the sleek streets of downtown Nashville, unaware of the deliberate plan unfolding around her. She had been focused on her latest project, sketching designs late into the night, when a message arrived on her phone, brief, polite, yet impossible to ignore. There's a new exhibit at the gallery tonight. I thought you might enjoy seeing it. Cherry paused. A gallery visit? With him? She felt the familiar thrill of danger. There was no mention of Seoyin, no overt claim of authority, just an invitation. She debated ignoring it but found herself intrigued. Curiosity, excitement, and something deeper pulled her toward the evening. When she arrived, the gallery was quiet, the lighting warm and intimate, highlighting contemporary works of art. Dong-Hun was already there, standing with his usual composure, a small, confident smile on his lips. He greeted her as if they were equals in a game only they understood. "Ms. Mackerel," he said, voice calm, controlled and deliberate, "I didn't expect you to accept." Cherry smirked, keeping her own aura of poise. "I'm curious. That counts for something, doesn't it?" Dong-Hun's eyes sparkled with subtle amusement. "Curiosity can be dangerous," he said softly, stepping closer, close enough that the faint scent of his cologne reached her. "But I trust you like danger." Cherry felt her pulse quicken. This wasn't the lounge, this wasn't a networking event. Here there were no distractions, no prying eyes, and no structured professional pretense. Just him. Just her. And the magnetic tension that neither could deny. As they moved through the gallery discussing pieces of art, architecture, and design, Dong-Hun's comments became subtly personal. He complimented her eye for detail, praised her confidence, and teased her in ways that forced her to respond with wit. Every glance, every fleeting brush of hands, every carefully measured step was a dance, an unspoken test of boundaries. Cherry noticed the slight restraint in his demeanor, a discipline born of obligation. Seoyin's presence loomed, even if unseen, influencing his every move. And yet, despite that, he allowed himself moments of boldness, a lingering look, a close step, a quiet remark that sent a thrill through her. By the end of the gallery visit, the tension had reached a new level. Cherry felt the pull of attraction stronger than before, a dangerous temptation she wasn't ready to fully indulge but couldn't ignore. Dong-Hun, watching her prepare to leave, let the moment hang between them, the thrill of anticipation lingering like electricity in the air. As the gallery door closed behind her, both of them knew one thing: their connection had crossed a line. The world of rules, obligations, and fiancé commitments had been breached, and there was no turning back. Cherry Mackerel sat in her apartment late that evening, sketchbook open but untouched, her mind replaying every moment of the gallery visit. Dong-Hun Han had been bold, deliberate, and electrifying. His presence, the subtle proximity, the way he challenged her without forcing her, it had left her heart racing and her thoughts in disarray. She had told herself she could resist him. She had told herself she was in control. Yet every memory of him, the way he looked at her, the way he spoke, the thrill that ran like electricity through their encounters made her pulse quicken. Dong-Hun, miles away in his suite, faced his own reckoning. Seoyin, his fiancé, had noticed subtle shifts in him over the past days. His attention wandered, his responses delayed, and his eyes had a faraway intensity that hadn't been there before. Though she didn't yet know Cherry's name, she could sense a change, a complication that threatened the carefully ordered life she expected. For Dong-Hun, the pull toward Cherry had become impossible to ignore. He had tried distance, professionalism, and casual encounters under business pretense, yet each interaction had drawn him deeper. Something about her audacity, her confidence, and her refusal to be controlled ignited a fire in him he had not felt in years. He made a decision. One that carried risk, temptation, and the possibility of consequences he wasn't entirely prepared for. He sent a discreet message to Cherry. "Dinner? No agenda, just a conversation." Cherry stared at the message, her fingers trembling slightly. The professional guise, the carefully constructed facade was gone. Here was a man willing to risk propriety, obligation, and reputation just to see her. Her heartbeat quickened, her curiosity burned, and a dangerous thrill surged through her veins. That evening she arrived at the restaurant, sleek and poised, yet internally electric with anticipation. Dong-Hun was already there, seated in a private booth, impeccably dressed and radiating calm authority. His eyes found hers instantly, and for a moment, the world outside the restaurant didn't exist. "You came," he said simply, standing slightly to greet her. "I did," she replied, letting a faint smirk linger. "Curiosity can be dangerous, you know." "And yet," he murmured, lowering his voice so only she could hear, "here we are, on the edge of danger anyway." Dinner passed in a careful dance of conversation, humor, and subtle flirtation. Dong-Hun complimented her insights, challenged her opinions, and shared glimpses of a world she had only guessed existed. Cherry responded in kind, teasing him, challenging him, and yet subtly letting herself be drawn closer. Every glance, every lean, every shared laugh carried unspoken electricity. By the end of the night, as Cherry left the restaurant, the unspoken acknowledgement of desire and temptation hung thick in the air. Both knew they were walking a line far beyond professionalism or propriety. A line neither was willing or perhaps able to retreat from. The morning after dinner, Cherry woke to a quiet apartment, the city still half asleep outside her window. But inside, her thoughts were anything but calm. Dong-Hun's presence lingered like a phantom, the intensity of his gaze, the subtle warmth in his words, the thrill of the night. She couldn't deny it, he had stirred something within her she hadn't felt in years. Desire, excitement, and a dangerous curiosity. Dong-Hun Han, meanwhile, stared out over the Tennessee skyline from his suite. The decision he faced was unavoidable now. Seoyin's voice, composed and measured, had always guided his actions, reinforced his obligations, and ensured his life remained orderly. But Cherry Mackerel, the audacious, fearless woman who had kissed him recklessly, was unraveling that order, exposing cracks in a life meticulously constructed. He reviewed his schedule, a careful facade of professional appointments and investor meetings. Yet beneath it, he planned another encounter with Cherry, a private meeting, a chance to explore the pull between them. One glance, one touch, one conversation, and he would have to decide if he could continue living a life dictated by duty, or if he would finally act on desire. Cherry, unaware of the extent of his internal struggle, focused on her own work that day. Yet every email, every blueprint, every phone call failed to distract her from the knowledge that he existed in the same city, and that their lives were on a collision course. She felt exhilaration and caution in equal measure. That evening, Dong-Hun invited her to a private tour of one of his investments, a luxury development she had been asked to provide architectural input on. The excuse was professional, the underlying motive was dangerously personal. Cherry accepted, curious and cautious, unaware of just how close the encounter would bring them. At the development site, the tension was immediate. Dong-Hun guided her through the property, his eyes lingering on hers a second longer than necessary, his subtle touches on railings and models brushing against her space with deliberate intent. Cherry felt the electricity of proximity, the thrill of being observed by someone so powerful, so untouchable, and yet so aware of her presence. "Ms. Mackerel," he said softly, stepping closer under the guise of showing her a design feature. "I need to know something." Cherry looked up, heart racing. "And what would that be?" "Whether you understand the kind of danger you bring," he murmured, his voice low, magnetic, and charged with intent. Cherry's breath caught, she felt exposed, exhilarated, and alive. "I'm not afraid of danger," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his without flinching. He studied her, his expression unreadable before a small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "Good," he said. "Because you're about to find out just how far it can go." In that moment, the boundaries of their worlds blurred. Duty, propriety, and obligation, the rules that had always guided Dong-Hun's life, were now in direct conflict with the pull he felt toward her. Cherry, fearless and bold, realized she was on the edge of something irreversible, a choice that would change both their lives. And somewhere in Seoul, Seoyin's presence remained like a shadow, unseen but influential. The first signs of disruption in her carefully ordered plan had begun, and she would soon act to protect her place in Dong-Hun's life. But for now, in the quiet hum of the luxury development, Cherry and Dong-Hun stood dangerously close to the edge, desire, temptation, and the thrill of the unknown pressing in from all sides. Cherry Mackerel had been unaware of how deeply she had begun to care, or, more accurately, how dangerously she had begun to feel. Her thoughts of Dong-Hun Han were no longer fleeting sparks. They were a constant hum, a magnetic pull that made her pulse quicken even during mundane tasks. She tried to deny it, told herself she was careful, rational, independent, but every encounter with him left her more exposed, more alive, and more dangerously tempted. That evening, Dong-Hun had arranged another professional meeting for a design review for one of his investments. Cherry arrived at the luxurious site, thinking it would be business as usual. But the moment she stepped into the private conference room, the subtle tension was palpable. Dong-Hun was already there, standing near the large window overlooking the city skyline, the city lights reflecting off his perfectly tailored suit. "You're punctual," he said, voice smooth but carrying an undercurrent of something unspoken. "I like that." Cherry smiled faintly, maintaining her composure. "Professionalism, Mr. Han, you should know I take it seriously." He studied her for a long moment as if weighing her, before he allowed himself a small, deliberate step closer. The room suddenly felt smaller, charged with the invisible electricity that always seemed to follow him. And then the subtle disruption arrived. Seoyin entered the building quietly, elegantly, and without overt fanfare, yet her presence was impossible to ignore. She moved with precision, her eyes immediately finding Dong-Hun's, and Cherry's pulse quickened not from excitement this time, but from awareness of the unseen tension she didn't yet fully understand. Dong-Hun's expression shifted slightly at her presence, a brief tightening around his eyes, and Cherry caught it. Something about Seoyin's demeanor communicated authority, expectation, and silent warning. Seoyin approached, voice calm but pointed. "Dong-Hun, I wasn't aware you had scheduled additional meetings tonight," she said, subtly emphasizing her watchfulness. Her gaze swept across the room, landing on Cherry with quiet appraisal. "I trust everything here is under control?" Cherry felt the weight of the unspoken message. Seoyin is a threat. A highly intelligent, observant, and exacting threat. Dong-Hun's response was careful, controlled, but deliberate. "Everything is proceeding as planned," he said, his tone measured, but his eyes flicked back to Cherry with that quiet intensity she had come to recognize. "You have nothing to worry about." Seoyin's subtle scrutiny lingered for a moment longer before she turned, her presence still a silent shadow over the room. The tension she left behind was almost palpable, a reminder to both Dong-Hun and Cherry of the stakes in play. Once she had gone, the room seemed to shrink. Dong-Hun stepped closer to Cherry, lowering his voice. "She's observant," he murmured almost as a warning, "but she doesn't see everything. Not yet." Cherry swallowed, sensing both the danger and the thrill. "I see enough," she said quietly. "And I can handle it." Dong-Hun's lips curved into a small, dangerous smile. "I like that about you," he admitted, the undercurrent of desire unmistakable. "Most people crumble under pressure. You thrive." For the first time, Cherry felt the full weight of what was happening. The attraction, the danger, the risk. But she also felt exhilarated. She was alive in a way she hadn't been for years, and the presence of Seoyin, rather than deterring her, made every heartbeat sharper, every glance more electric. Dong-Hun reached just close enough to brush a hand lightly across her arm, a subtle touch, intimate yet controlled. Cherry felt the current surge through her. The line between professional interaction and personal temptation had been crossed. And in that charged moment, both knew that choices had to be made. Desire and duty were colliding, and the storm that had been building for weeks was finally reaching its tipping point. Dong-Hun Han had spent his life mastering control over markets, over people, over himself. But standing alone in the quiet of his suite that night, he knew control was no longer enough. What he felt for Cherry Mackerel was not confusion, not temptation, not a passing distraction. It was clarity. And clarity demanded action. Seoyin arrived just after dawn, composed as ever, her posture flawless, her expression unreadable. She had sensed the shift long before she saw it, the way Dong-Hun no longer masked his distance, the way his silence spoke louder than any argument. "We need to talk," she said calmly, settling into the chair opposite him. "Yes," Dong-Hun replied, his voice steady. "We do." There was no anger in his tone, no defensiveness, only resolve. He explained carefully, not cruelly, not dismissively. He spoke of change, of realization, of the truth he could no longer ignore. Their engagement had been built on alignment, expectation, and legacy, not love, and now, continuing it would be a lie. Seoyin listened without interruption. When he finished, she exhaled slowly. Her pride was wounded, but her dignity remained intact. "So this is about her," she said, not accusing, observing. "Yes," Dong-Hun answered honestly. "But more than that, it's about who I am when I'm with her. And who I am not when I'm not." There was a long silence, then Seoyin stood. "I won't fight for a man who has already chosen," she said coolly. "But understand that these choices have consequences." "I understand," he replied. And for the first time he meant it fully. The engagement ended quietly, without scandal or spectacle. But for Dong-Hun, the weight that lifted was immeasurable. That evening, Cherry was reviewing sketches in her apartment when the knock came. She wasn't expecting anyone when she opened the door and saw him standing there with no entourage, no polished armor, just Dong-Hun, her breath caught. "I ended it," he said simply. Cherry searched his face, reading the seriousness in his eyes. "You didn't have to do anything because of me," she said softly. "I didn't," he replied. "I did it because of myself. You just showed me the truth." Silence filled the space between them, thick, charged, fragile. Then Cherry stepped aside, letting him in. "I never planned for you," she admitted. I was supposed to leave after that kiss. You were supposed to be nothing. And yet, he said quietly, moving closer, here we are. This time when he kissed her, it wasn't reckless or impulsive, it was deliberate, certain, chosen. Cherry felt it, not the thrill of escape, not the danger of secrecy, but the grounding force of being wanted without conditions. She didn't disappear after this kiss. She stayed. Weeks later, the world learned who Dong-Hun Han truly was, not just a powerful billionaire CEO, but a man who had walked away from expectations to choose authenticity. And Cherry Mackerel? She continued building her legacy, her independence intact, her heart open but not surrendered. They didn't complete each other. They met each other as equals. And it all began the night she kissed a stranger to ruin a date, unaware he would change her life forever.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel. Click on the notification icon so that you will get notified whenever a new story is posted. Also leave us a like, comment, and share to others who love good stories.